Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sue Fasciani with Tiger Home and Building Inspections. Thank you so much for joining us for Mold to Sold, mold and water intrusion in the real estate transaction. Today, I am here with Kara Golden. She's Director of Marketing, and her and I work in the marketing department together. So she will be handling all questions through the chat. So you can actually send your questions directly to her, or you can put them, in the chat to everyone. Either is fine. Go ahead, Bill, and move on to the next slide, please. We hope that you'll stay to the very end for our raffle. We are doing a Panera gift card raffle, and also we'll be doing a second chance to win. So if you follow us on Tiger Group, on Instagram, on our Tiger account, that would be great. You can see the information on there, and maybe even make a comment about today's seminar. It would be much appreciated. We're here today with Bill Denslow. If you don't know Bill, he is our mold manager, and is go ahead, Bill, you can flip on to that next slide. Oh, where'd Bill go? All right, sorry. Anyway, Bill Denslow, he's been working with Tiger for many years. He's our mold manager, and we call him our mold geek. He just loves to talk about mold, and not only does he do home inspections, but he also, like I said, he runs our mold division and is out there doing mold assessments. A little bit about Tiger before we get started, and that is we are a Connecticut family-owned business. We've been around since 1992. We're celebrating 30 years. And we're very happy about that. So we're offering special promotions for your clients, $30 off a home inspection, $30 off a radon air test. So keep that in mind. We're out 7 days a week. We know you guys are working 7 days a week. We are performing residential inspections and commercial assessments statewide, as well as bordering the towns in New York, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. Out of our 22 home inspectors, many of them have specialties, so you can see those listed on the screen, and also know that they are all licensed with the wood destroying insect license. So we include that for free with our home inspections. One thing I want you to know too is we know that turnaround time is important. So we work on getting those reports out to you within 24 hours. And, right now we have openings on the weekends as well as, during the week naturally. So always call in and ask. And we are allowed to offer advanced setup for radon and air and doing water tests. So that's a plus for your clients to get those results even quicker. So if you have a need to get in those results fast, request it, and we'll do everything we can to work with you and get somebody in there early to do that testing. So before we continue on, Bill, maybe you can just flip that slide and we'll get going. There's Mr. Bill Denslow. The slides were a little out of order. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Bill.
All right. Thank you, Sue. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for showing up. I hope we'll be able to learn something and come away a little more knowledgeable. At any rate, this is our agenda for this morning. We're going to look at the relationship between home inspections and mold. We're also going to look at what mold is, moisture and water intrusion. That will come up time and time again. Water, moisture, high humidity is critical when we're dealing with mold issues. Also going to look at, excuse me, a little bit about mold assessments and remediation, excuse me, and then mold in the real estate transaction as well. So first up, just a couple of questions to wake everybody up. This is mold and home inspections. The question is a home inspector required to identify mold? Well, the answer is not really, no. It is somewhat not disclaimed, but it's not included in the Connecticut Home Inspection Licensing Standards. Down at the bottom of that screen, it says, a quote, from those standards, the presence of any environmental hazards, including but not limited to toxins, which could be mold, carcinogens, which could be mold, noise, contaminants in soil, water, and air, which could be mold, the presence of radon, asbestos, lead paint, or lead solder. So it's not specifically addressed in the standards. However, if a home inspector sees mold or suspects a significant mold issue, they are most likely going to mention it and maybe recommend that you have a mold assessment done or somehow pursue that to get that taken care of. The next question is, a home inspector required to identify water penetration or intrusion that may lead to mold? Well, the answer to that is most definitely yes. If you ever sat down and read through a home inspection report with water issues in the back of your mind, you'd be really surprised at how much of that inspection deals with water issues, water coming in, leaks, sealants, wet basements, plumbing leaks, things like that. Water is a big deal in homes. Even high humidity, which would be included in water issues, can be a pretty damaging thing to homes. So yes, the home inspector does need to do that. Let's look at mold itself. First of all, what is mold? It's a microscopic organism. It's found everywhere worldwide. We'll never get away from mold. The spores are absolutely everywhere. There are a lot of mold problems in Antarctica, the research stations down there, because they have a lot of humidity issues. So they routinely have mold issues down there. Actually, the International Space Station had at least 2 incidences that I know of where they had mold growing behind control panels and things like that. They did not invite me up to do any assessment. I was very disappointed, but maybe next time. But it is everywhere. The CDC estimates that there's 300,000 to 400,000 mold species. Actually, that is extremely low. There's other organizations that estimate up to 1.5 million different mold species. Now, as you can imagine, most of these aren't studied at all. A lot of them aren't even named. They just know that they're there. They'll give them a numerical number or something like that, but they're just not studied. It's not a really well investigated field. We know a lot about mold, but there's much more that we really don't know. It does have a purpose in nature, not just to bother us, but it breaks down dead materials, mostly cellulose materials. And it would be a very different world out there if mold weren't out there doing its job. Molds are, they're a type of fungi that lives on organic materials. If you remember your 7th or 8th grade biology, you probably learned about Linnaeus and the different kingdoms, a kingdom, phylum, class, so on and so forth. Well, it comes down to different kingdoms. Fungi or fungus is one kingdom. Molds are within that kingdom. So all molds are a type of fungus. Not all types of fungus are molds, but molds are all fungi. It's funny, I'm often told at the beginning of a mold assessment, I always kind of try to find out, why am I there? Are there health concerns? Did my clients have a run-in with mold sometime in the past? Are they just doing their due diligence? Do they have young people, babies, elderly moving in that might be susceptible to this stuff? And every now and again, I'll get the answer, oh, no, there's nothing going on. I just want to make sure there's no mold in my house. And that's when I do my best Joan Rivers and I say, can we talk? Because again, mold is everywhere. We're never going to get to a situation where we can get mold out of a house completely. The spores are always floating around to some extent. But it's all about comparing what's inside to what's outside. Since we can't get rid of it all, we can at least try to make sure that the house indoor environment is pretty much the same as what's going on outside the house. I think we'd already talked about all this. Mold is everywhere. It does need 3 things to grow. It needs oxygen, which we really can't control. It needs a food source, which the stuff will eat almost anything. It's remarkable what mold will eat. I've seen it growing on basement oil tanks. Sometimes they get that oil spilled over onto the side of the tank, and mold will eat that stuff. So we really can't control the food source very well at all. And it needs moisture. That's what we can control. So in controlling indoor moisture, we'll control the mold growth. And some of the pictures are there. The bottom left, that's a leaf that's being eaten up. The upper right, that's some bread that sat around a little too long. So what does mold look like? Well, there's a lot of confusion about colors and mold. Mold comes in all colors of the rainbow. Any color you can imagine, there's a few molds that will grow in that color. Molds will also change color according to what they eat or according to their life cycle. We really cannot identify molds by the color. There is a lot of talk going around about toxic black molds or just black molds. Well, there are a lot of black molds out there, and a couple of them, yeah, they are toxic, but there's many, many others that are not. So again, we just can't tell much of anything about a mold by its color. We can't identify the genus, we can't identify the species. And there is, by the way, no category of molds called toxic black molds. There's no category called black molds. That's an internet myth. Mold spores and odors. The spores are microscopic. Some of them get fantastically small, but we can't see any of them. Even the large ones, we can't see them. They're microscopic. We can't smell them and we can't taste them. That odor you get sometimes when you walk into a basement and you go, oh, there's mold down here. Well, those are microbial volatile organic chemicals, or MVOCs, and it's gases that the mold is giving off as it's digesting things. That we certainly can smell. And some of those chemicals, by the way, are toxic in and of themselves. Never mind the spores. These chemicals can be pretty bad with some of the molds. But that's what we smell. And the molds do not spread by the gases. They only spread by spores. They do use the gases, though. It's really interesting in that these molds have developed certain skills that they can use against other molds. So some of the gases that molds will give off will kill surrounding molds, so that mold has more of an opportunity to spread out. These molds are at war with each other. We tend to get caught in the middle of this thing, but they're vicious little animals. Well, not animals, plants, fungi, excuse me. So anyway, there are a couple of VOCs that really can affect us. There's at least one I know of that can produce gases that will actually suppress our immune system. And that gives the spores a chance to get in past our immune system and from our lungs into our bloodstream, and then from there anywhere in our bodies. It's really remarkable. And the molds will use this because they will colonize, some of them will colonize inside our bodies or inside animals' bodies. So they can use these gases to kind of open the door so that the spores can come in. It's really interesting stuff. This is why they call me a mold geek, by the way. I find this fascinating. Sensitivity and symptoms. Well, here's where we get into our interactions with mold. Individual reactions vary. Some people have allergies. Some people have pretty severe respiratory issues when they're exposed to mold. Immunological issues, that is usually someone that already has a suppressed immune system. They're on chemotherapy, or their immune system is being suppressed because of transplant surgery, or they've got an immunological disease. Those people are very high risk for mold getting into them and causing all kinds of problems. But mold itself, except in very, very rare circumstances, won't really be able to get past a healthy immune system. So if your immune system is good, you're in pretty good shape. But there's a lot of people out there that just don't have those good systems working anymore, and they have to be very, very careful. Respiratory issues, well, usually the first place mold spores hit is our lungs. That can cause an immune reaction in the lungs, and then we've got all kinds of respiratory issues going on there. And then just common allergies, the usual, itchy eyes, runny nose, cough, that kind of thing. Everybody reacts differently to different molds at different exposure levels. Everyone's immune system is unique, and it will react differently to different molds at different exposure levels. The longer you're exposed to mold, the more likely it is you're going to have a reaction. Some people just will not react at all to molds. They're fine with it. They could live in damp caves. They don't really care. Other people are very, very sensitive to it. And then there's everything in between. This is why we're never going to have a set standard for mold levels in the house. We're never going to be able to say, well, this level of mold spores in a house is just fine. This level, however, is high enough so that it's actionable, or you should take action. You should get some mold remediation done. It won't ever happen because, again, everybody is different. They react differently. So it's never going to be like radon, where you can say under 4.0 picocuries, don't worry about it. Over 4.0, yeah, get a system in to reduce that. Unfortunately, mold just isn't that simple. Mold in a home. I'm sorry, I've got a note here to stop for questions. Do we have any questions, Kara?
Sorry, Bill, I do not have any questions at this time.
Okay, let's move on. Let's look at mold in a home, how it gets there. Again, mold is moisture related. In fact, if you have a mold problem in your home, what you really have is a moisture problem. You need to get rid of the moisture. Then you can get rid of the mold and it won't come back. If you get rid of the mold and you don't deal with the moisture that allowed that mold to grow, the mold will just grow back, or another species or another genus will take over. And it'll just be an ongoing thing and never get rid of it. You've got to address that moisture. So we've got high humidity, basements. We all know basements are very, very high humidity. Water penetration issues. Water can get in all kinds of places. It comes in through the basement, the foundation wall cracks, basement floor cracks. It just works its way in. A good solid concrete foundation, even if it doesn't have any cracks in it, moisture will still migrate through concrete. It is porous and it'll raise that humidity. Air leaks can cause temperature differentials. When you have cold air outside getting into a warm area, you've got that temperature differential. The warm area cools down and you can have condensation at that point. This is why quite often we'll get molds inside wall cavity, mold to grow. So all kinds of opportunities for air leaks, windows, doors, just loose framing, loose construction. Bathrooms are another big one. Exhaust fans. A lot of people have exhaust fans and they don't use them, or they'll run it for 5 minutes and then shut it off, and that's not enough to get all that moisture-laden air out of the bathroom. Roofing problems, of course, leaks around flashings, chimneys, dormers, any roof penetrations and things like that. There are a lot of places where moisture can occur. Of course, plumbing leaks are a big one. Cooking is another source. So anything that produces moisture has to be carefully managed. Moisture will get absorbed into porous materials like sheetrock, and then the moisture really has trouble getting back out. So it stays damp, and guess what happens? Mold starts to grow. I think we just talked about that. That picture in the background, by the way, it's a little grayed out, but that's the backside of a roof. Attics have trouble with moisture in the wintertime. And the warm air gets up there. As it cools down, it reaches dew point, which is 100% relative humidity. The moisture can't get out of the attic. It just collects on the backside of the roof. And this is what happens. The spores discover it and they just go to town. So leaky roofs, houses aren't quite tight enough, improperly vented appliances, exhaust fans, damp basements, crawl spaces are always nasty places, mostly because of the humidity. And then poor attic ventilation, bathroom ventilation. Any questions yet, Kara?
I don't have any questions.
Okay. Somehow they've gotten misplaced. So what do we do about this? How do we manage it? Well, there's really 4 steps. You assess, you determine, you remediate, and you eliminate. To assess is someone needs to come in and find out the extent of the problem. This is where a mold assessment would come in. We go through the entire house, top to bottom. I'll cover that a little bit later, and it would take samples, and we can figure out, where the problem areas are. Of course, we can see them usually, but we can also do air sampling to determine spore levels in the air and how far is this problem spread and that type of thing. And then, so we need to kind of assess that, but also determine the source of the moisture. Where's that coming from? What can be done about that? And then we move on to remediating the mold, which is getting rid of the mold. Remediation basically means get the mold out of the house and then eliminate the moisture. Eliminate the moisture. It always comes down to moisture. The technical definition for remediate, by the way, is to provide a remedy for, to redress, or to make right. But in the context of mold remediation, it just means remove the mold from the house. Again, just a quick recap. We can't control what mold eats. We can't control the air that it needs, but we can control the moisture levels. If you're noticing a theme here, you're paying attention. It's really all about the moisture, and this people just don't understand this. Again, if you've got a mold issue, you have a moisture issue. Mold is the symptom. 50% relative humidity or lower is ideal. At 50% humidity, relative humidity, mold won't grow. There's just not enough moisture in the air to plate out or to collect on surfaces to allow that mold to grow. So that's the target. If you're putting a dehumidifier in your basement, you want to set it for about 50%, certainly no higher than that, and then just let it go and do its thing. And all other things being equal, you should be in good shape. This slide here, this is one of my favorite slides, actually. It looks kind of dry and graph-like, and it is, but it really shows a good relationship between humidity and mold and lots of other things that we run into in our homes. Down along the left, you see bacteria, viruses, fungi, mites, and fungi. Remember, mold is a fungus, and then respiratory infections, a lot of other things. And along the bottom there, you get the percent of the relative humidity. That little yellow arrow points to 50% humidity. The red wedges show the amount of growth of these various things. The wider the wedge, the more the growth. So to take bacteria, for example, when it gets too dry, bacteria will thrive in that. But as that humidity goes to around 50%, the growth tapers off. And then when it gets above 50%, it goes up again. The same thing with viruses. Fungus in very, very dry environments, it has lots and lots of trouble. Can barely manage to grow at all. But then above 55, 60%, it really starts to enjoy its environment. But mites, respiratory infections, all kinds of things, even chemical interactions are rather low at 50%. And ozone is down there also. So it's a very healthy environment for us, 50% relative humidity, not so healthy for these other things that we may be fighting in our homes. So let's look at mold assessments and figure out what this is. Essentially, it's a thorough analysis for active and potential water intrusion, areas of elevated humidity, and other water-related concerns. Also looking for, visual mold, or looking carefully at areas that we know are likely for mold growth. It would best be performed by somebody that's qualified to do it, a certified mold expert. It includes the use of moisture beaters, infrared temperature guns, and infrared scanning equipment, which is really neat stuff. I'm going to show you a slide on that a little bit later. The sampling during a mold assessment includes a baseline outside sample. Remember, these spores are everywhere. So we can't just take some samples inside and say, oh, look, you got mold. Because anywhere that I take a sample, I'm going to get some spores. I've taken, I don't know how many samples I've taken, but I've never seen one house as far as the spore ecology in order to understand what's going on inside as to whether or not it's a problem. So it's all about comparing inside to outside. Additional samples are sometimes necessary. If it's a larger home or there's a particular area that is really a potential problem area, I may want to get another air sample there. Some people want specific areas sampled, master bedroom, the child's bedroom because they have asthma, things like that. And I'll be happy to accommodate all that stuff. I can also take surface samples. Sometimes there's something on a wall that, yeah, looks like mold, but it might possibly be something else. Well, I would probably want to get a sample of that, send it off to the lab and see what they say. Surface samples also help to kind of bolster the air sample findings. If the two coordinate well with each other, then we could really pinpoint an issue and point the remediators in the correct direction. This is just a quick shot of infrared imaging. And if you've been on any of our mold assessments, you've probably seen us walking around with these big cameras. This is really fascinating technology. When I do a mold assessment, I go through the entire house visually, basement or crawl space, up through the house, into the attic, and I'm visually looking for mold or evidence of mold. But I can only see so far, like anybody else. Well, infrared allows me to see a little bit further. What the infrared camera does, or scanner, is it scans surfaces and it's measuring temperature differentials, differences in temperature on surfaces. And if I find something that is a pretty marked difference, I know that it's either water related or it's air related, depending on what the weather is doing outside and what that particular area looks like in infrared. I can pretty much figure out whether that's moisture or air. These examples here in the upper left, that's a master bedroom closet, and you can see part of the ceiling there. And it looks pristine. There's no staining on that ceiling whatsoever. There's nothing. And yet when I look at it in infrared, you can see that dark blue area. That's cold. The darker the color in an infrared image, the colder the surface. So I walked over to it, put my moisture meter up there, and sure enough, it was damp. But it hadn't gotten wet enough to come through to stain the inside yet. And I would not have seen that except in the infrared. So it's very, very neat. In the lower left, that's a living room ceiling. And then if you look at the right side, you see that blue blob there. Well, that's a water leak, but it had not stained anything on the ceiling as of yet. So I went over with the meter, checked it, sure enough, it was wet. That was a flashing leak on a dormer directly above the living room here. So it's very, very valuable for a mold investigation. We can actually find these things before they become visible in a lot of cases. It doesn't allow me to see inside walls. It is not X-ray vision. It's still measuring surfaces, but it measures surface temperatures that we just can't see with our eyes. So it's really, really handy stuff. That's a picture of the cameras that we use. So what happens to the samples is I package them up, I send them off to the lab. The lab looks at them under a microscope and they determine the genus of the mold. And then if it's an air sample, they actually count the spores in there. And knowing how much air passed through that sample, they can then extrapolate how many spores per cubic meter are floating around in the area that we tested. So it's pretty neat. They send a report back to me, their lab analysis. And it's basically, it looks like a lab analysis. It's really dull. It's a bunch of numbers. And I look that over and I coordinate that with my visual observations, my infrared observations, and then compile that all into a report that goes out to my client. And the report includes kind of a synopsis of what's going on in the house. It'll have some photographs, maybe some infrared images if they're pertinent, and then some recommendations as to how to proceed. Do we need a professional remediator? Is this a homeowner level cleanup job? Do we need to maybe possibly investigate further because there was nothing visual going on and yet the air samples came back very high in mold spores? And then, of course, there's always follow-up consultation. Everybody, not everybody, but almost everybody that gets these reports, they look at it and they immediately pick up the phone and they call me. They say, what is this thing telling me? Which is fine. I enjoy talking about mold. I enjoy talking to people. And you guys are always welcome to call if you have any mold questions at all. It can be related to a home inspection. It could be related to a mold assessment. Could just be a general question, or maybe somebody else did an assessment you have a question on. Be happy to talk to you about that. I'm always available for that kind of thing. Who needs a mold assessment? Yeah, who needs this stuff? Well, there are a number of people that really should have this done. And these are people that are sensitive to mold. Again, health issues. If they have that suppressed immune system, or they got other immunological problems going on, or severe allergies, or they have known sensitivities to mold, it's really a pretty good idea that they get this done. Increased public awareness, that's one that, boy, I kind of fight that day in and day out. A lot of people will jump on the internet and they'll start reading about mold. Not a good thing to do, not at all. Eventually, sooner rather than later, they're going to run into toxic black mold horror stories. And they want to make sure that they don't have toxic black mold that's going to eat them while they're sleeping in their homes and that kind of thing. So I do a lot of talking people down off, too many hours spent on the internet looking at this kind of stuff. It's just crazy. But, if your client expresses any concern about mold, or they express a sensitivity, it's really a good idea to recommend that they at least give me a call, and I'll explain what we can do as far as a mold assessment, and then they can decide whether that's for them or not. We don't really have any interest in selling any mold remediation services. It's not something that Tiger does. We do simply the mold assessment. So I don't have any vested interest in finding mold or not finding mold. My interest is in doing an accurate mold assessment. We're not out there to sell samples. Sometimes I will want to take extra samples, but there's usually a good reason for that. We're just trying to offer a good service to our clients. And as you know, every year that goes by, there's more and more awareness and interest in mold. And again, there is so much disinformation out there on the internet. It's crazy. People get these really odd ideas, but at least they're aware of it, and they can, talk to me or talk to you now that you'll be a little bit better educated after this seminar. And kind of, you can help put things back in perspective for them, which is a lot of what I do, which is putting things in perspective for people. So mold remediation, this is where we get the mold out of the house, not we, but the mold gets gotten out of the house. There are steps to that. The first thing, of course, is to do a mold assessment, and that is to determine if there is a mold problem that warrants professional remediation. If there is, what is the scope of it? Is it limited to the crawl space? Is it limited to the master bedroom closet? Is it limited to just the basement or this area or that area? How far does this go? And that'll help guide the remediator and kind of put some guardrails on what he's doing. But a remediator will come in, he'll do his own little assessment, and then he'll contain the area that he's working in. And that will just contain the spores. As soon as they begin to disturb the mold, spores come off this stuff literally in the millions. So they have to contain all that so they don't contaminate the rest of the house. So they put up these big plastic barriers, and it looks like they're going in for toxic waste removal or something like that. In a sense, it's the same procedure. They get all suited up. They have respirators and Tyvek suits, and it looks kind of scary, but a lot of that is just to protect themselves. Then they will remove any materials they can remove. They will, usually porous materials, sheetrock, oriented strand board, plywood, things like that. They'll just take out. Things that they cannot take out, wall studs, things like that, they will clean the mold off the surface. They abrade it, sand it basically, and get it off that way. And then moisture control. We're back to moisture control again. That needs to be done, critical. Otherwise, they'll just be back in a month or two to do it all over again. Any good remediation will follow some standardized remediation protocol. And there are lots of them out there. The most well-known is called the IICRC S520. It's a national standard. It's kind of the gold standard for other mold remediation protocol. Connecticut, for example, has its own mold remediation protocol, but it's based on the IICRC S520. New York has its own standard. A lot of states do, but they all kind of go back to this S520. It's not a bad idea if you're shopping around for remediators and you're calling them, ask them, what protocol do you guys follow? If they say, well, we just clean it until it's gone, you may want to just thank them very kindly and hang up and call somebody else. If they say, well, we follow the IICRC S520, then that's a point in their favor. They at least know that the guidelines are there, and they probably do follow them if they quote them. So that's a good question to ask remediators if you're trying to vet them on the phone. Here's a picture of a remediation in progress. You can see the guys are all suited up. That big box thing, that's a negative air machine. They've already isolated the area they're working in, looks like a basement. And they put in this negative air machine, and there's a big fan inside that box, and it's just blowing air outside. So they lower the pressure in their contained area so that the spores will go outside rather than float on into the rest of the basement or up the basement stairs or anything like that. So that's one of the tools that they use. Their basic goal is to isolate the affected area. They remove the contaminated materials. They remove all the mold on the whatever they can't get out as far as materials. They'll just clean the mold off it, and then they clean everything. When they're all done, there shouldn't even be any dust in the area, because if there's dust, there's mold spores within that dust. So they clean everything. There are some remediators that will address the moisture issues as well. There are some that do not. It's not really part of remediation, but it's so intimately tied to keeping mold out of the house that a lot of remediators have kind of shifted over into that as well. So they'll do some addressing of the moisture issues. Important point here, remediation is an unregulated industry in Connecticut. So that means you really have to be careful if you're calling around. If you need references, by the way, or you're looking for names, you can always go on our website, tigerinspect.com, and look at our contractor network. And you can type in mold remediation, whatever county you're looking in. And this will give you some names of some companies. These are companies that we're familiar with. We've met them in the field. We know they do good work. We've vetted them somewhat to make sure that they don't have, 30,000 complaints against them and things like that. So it's a good source of references for you. And there's lots of other stuff on that list also. There's all kinds of different contractors that you can take advantage of. But again, a remediator, he needs to follow some standards. It gets kind of serious because we're dealing with people's health. So they do need to follow a certain protocol. They need to do this right. Because it's an unregulated industry, I will tell you, there are some companies out there that are not doing it right. Anybody can be a mold remediator. You just print up some business cards and off you go. You guys could do it this afternoon if you wanted to. You don't want to. It's nasty work. I don't want to. I'm much too lazy for that. But in any event, you do have to be very careful about who's coming out to take care of this for you. So handy homeowner or professional remediation? Well, we try to make that call in most of our assessments as to whether this is something that a homeowner can do or something that a remediator needs to come in and take care of. The EPA has helped us out here. They have somehow figured out that if it's less than 10 square feet of area involved with mold, that's considered a homeowner job. If it's more than 10 square feet, a professional remediator should come in. Which is not to say that some homeowners can't handle that, but they probably don't have the equipment that they need to have in order to protect themselves and the rest of the house. So it's best to hand it off to a professional if it looks like it's going to get a little tricky. Not always this 10 square feet, we can't always follow that. If I've got, 4 square feet in the basement, 3 square feet in a closet, and then another 7 square feet, or whatever up in the attic, we've got different areas that may warrant a professional coming in. Or there may be a little more than 10 square feet, but it's on a couple of, basement wall panels or something like that could just be, torn off the wall and thrown away. That would be a homeowner. But a good rule of thumb is that 10 square foot. If it's under that, it's a homeowner. If it's over that, it's more than likely a professional job. And while we're on homeowner stuff, by the way, bleach, it was what a lot of homeowners will grab to clean mold. Bleach really does not do a good job on mold at all. Because of its chemical makeup, it doesn't really soak in very well into the wood. It just sits on the top and it evaporates off. You know how fast bleach will evaporate. So it evaporates away. And if you stop and think for a minute, when you go out to buy a gallon of bleach, what did you just buy? What's in there? Well, it's actually maybe 4 or 5% bleach, and the rest of it is all water. So you go home and you spread this stuff on your wall or on your floor joist or wherever you're trying to get rid of the mold. The water soaks in, the bleach doesn't soak in, it evaporates away. And what you're left with is water. So basically you just watered your mold. It really just doesn't work very well at all. There's lots of other products that work a lot better. There are fungicides and mildicides, which are available in hardware stores, Home Depot, Lowe's, wherever you like to go. Those are products that are designed to kill fungi, which mold is. So they work pretty well. I've had a lot of anecdotal evidence that vinegar actually works well, just straight good old white vinegar. It does kill mold. It's almost all molds. It's just acidic enough so that it attacks those spores and just destroys them. So for a homeowner, I would suggest if it's a small area, try vinegar. It's probably a lot safer than these mildicides and fungicides, and it seems to work quite well. So always give that a try. Questions? Anyone
I
have
have
questions?
lots of great questions for you.
Oh, good. Okay.
All right. The first question is, so do you recommend dehumidifiers in all basements, or how do we know if the humidity is staying below 50%?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, when I do home inspections, when I do mold assessments, I usually at some point will recommend a dehumidifier go into the basement. Even if it's a bone dry basement, it's still going to collect a lot of humidity in the summertime. So you need a humidifier down there, warm, humid weather. Because of the way air currents run and temperature differentials and all that stuff, you will get humidity forming. If you go into a basement, you have a well tank or pressure tank. If that has a lot of humidity on it, moisture on it, you've got too much moisture in that basement. So you need to get a dehumidifier in. So yes, I always recommend dehumidifiers. The newer ones are very, very nice. They have electronic control panels in them. You can set it for whatever humidity you want and just let it go. Most of them have, they're called self-draining. They have pumps in them so that they'll pump out through a little drain tube. You can drain that wherever you want, into the washing machine drain or floor drain or really anywhere. So you don't have to worry about emptying buckets and all that stuff that everybody forgets to do. So they're great. You just kind of set them and forget them. As far as how do you know what your humidity is, again, a lot of the new dehumidifiers will have a hygrometer built into it. A hygrometer measures humidity. If it doesn't have one or you want another one, you can get them almost anywhere. They're very inexpensive, and it's like a thermometer, excuse me, except that it measures humidity. So you can put them up anywhere in the basement or wherever you have a question about the humidity level, and just keep an eye on it, and it'll let you know whether you need to address it or not.
Great, thanks. If this is on the same line, if a basement was remediated and set up with a dehumidifier, is there anything else to keep it dry? Would you need to do anything else long-term?
Oh, sure. Yeah. The first thing that I would suggest you do is go outside and take a look around the perimeter of the house. Make sure you're grading, that the pitch of the ground is all pitched away from the foundation. Take a look at your gutters also and make sure they're draining at least 6 to 8 feet away, and that they're clean and they're flowing freely. They're not overflowing all over the place. Those two things, gutters and grading, are really, really important to keep water out of a basement. They're the number 1 and number 2 cause of water in basements. So take a wander around the outside. If you've got a lot of shrubs and plantings up against the house, prune them back. Keep about a foot clearance between the house and the shrubs. Let some air get in there. Let things breathe. Let the soil dry out, and that'll go a long way also. And then just keep an eye on things. If you've got plumbing leak, of course, repair them promptly, all that kind of common sense stuff.
Thank you. Those are top home inspector tips that we hear daily on the home
Yeah.
inspection end as well. So one person asked about remediation, and I know this isn't really our wheelhouse, but I'm wondering about the cost of remediation. I'm imagining it varies, so ballpark or different situations.
Yeah, it really is not my bailiwick. I don't like to estimate other contractors' work. It's next to impossible. Very difficult to do with remediation. Often a remediator will come out because there's a problem somewhere, and once they get into it, then they discover, oh, wait a minute, this problem also is over here, behind these walls over here, things like that. So it kind of will sometimes spread a little bit. Really hard to give an estimate. Most of the really good remediation companies that I know of will come out and give you a free estimate. And they will also say, well, this is based on what I can see, what I can assume, but it may change, as we really get into the project. It's not inexpensive work. You can imagine what it's like to do this, especially in warm weather. You're suited up in the Tyvek suits, you've got gloves on, you've got booties, you've got a hood, you've got a respirator. It's just not fun work at all. You're working in basements and crawl spaces and attics and all the places people don't want to go. So it is not inexpensive. It's not rocket science, but it is pretty labor intensive. So yeah, I really couldn't say. I would, it depends also on the severity of the problem. It could be a $800 job, $850, $900. It could be, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 and up, depending on the severity of the problem. So I would say call around and try, if you've got an issue, try to get some companies that will come out and give you a free estimate. That's really the best you can do.
Super. And then Edward had a follow-up there. Who would you recommend for mold remediation? And I know Bill already mentioned we have a contractor network on our website. You can just search mold remediation, but he also may have some specific recommendations. You could
if you really get, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Kara.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
If you really get stuck or you just can't find anybody on that list that is going to work out or in your area or whatever, yeah, give me a call and I can give you a few names. I try to keep track of these guys out there, who's really good, who's, and who's stay away from them. Yeah, you can always give me a call.
Super. And you'll get all of our contact information at the end. Michelle, thank you. She said, I've used your resource list on your website and I've had great experience. She also shared she had for her sellers with one of our mold guys. So she had great experiences working with us. So I appreciate that. Nancy said, thank you for the great tip on the bleach. And of course, what kind of vinegar? So we want to specify that it's not balsamic that we'd be using, but it would be what, white vinegar, I would assume?
Yeah, straight white vinegar.
Okay.
Regular old grocery store shelf white vinegar.
Okay. Is there an
Balsamic
ideal?
vinegar might be fun, but I don't know if that'll work too well.
Well, they were kind of joking on the question, saying it would make the house smell nice.
Yeah, it would.
Is there an ideal spot to place a dehumidifier in a basement?
Centrally located. If the basement is one wide open room, just locate it centrally. That's the best thing you can do. If you've got a basement that is half finished, half unfinished, and the areas are kind of open to each other, there's a door or two that goes from one to the other, leave the doors open, put the dehumidifier in the finished basement, and air will circulate very slowly in a basement without fans or anything. And humidity, believe it or not, will circulate also. Humidity tends to move from more humid areas to less humid areas. It's called vapor pressure, and it moves pretty much like temperature. Temperature will always move from warmer to colder. Humidity will move from more humid to less humid. So if you have a humidifier in your finished area and it's higher humidity in the unfinished area, that humidity will work its way over into the finished area, and then the dehumidifier will kind of suck it up out of the air. So yeah, if you've got two areas that you really want to keep separate from each other, you may need two dehumidifiers, one in the finished area, one in the unfinished area. Or if you've got a basement under part of the house, a crawl space under another part, you may need two dehumidifiers. Yeah, try to avoid that if you can, because they're not cheap to run. They run like little window air conditioners, but sometimes that's necessary.
All right, we're gonna have two more quick questions and then we've got to keep moving on here.
Right.
Does having carpet versus hardwood or tile in the basement affect the humidity levels? And do you recommend a particular type of flooring for a basement?
As far as recommendations, I recommend not carpet.
Okay.
Yeah, carpeting in a basement is basically an invitation for mold. It's a molded garden waiting to happen. Again, concrete is porous. Remember, your basement floor is most likely concrete. Moisture will come up through that. You'll never see this happen. It comes up microscopically, and it can collect in the carpet. Once it gets into the carpet, it's more or less trapped in there. And there you go. You've got mold spores settling out of the air onto the carpet. The mold looks around and says, this is wonderful, and just starts growing. And you may not see it in carpeting until it's rather extensive. So I don't like to see carpets in basements, not at all. Vinyl flooring, any type of tile or laminate. Laminate's not so much. You still have to steel the floor, put down the plastic barrier, and then you can put your laminate flooring down if it's a wood laminate. But any of the resilient vinyl tiles nowadays are very, very nice. They're comfortable to walk on. They look great. So I prefer violence. Yeah, excuse me 1 second here. I prefer vinyl in a basement.
Okay, and our last question, please mention again the device that measures humidity.
It's called a hygrometer.
Hydrometer. Okay.
Hygrometer. Hygrometer.
And sorry, one last question. And I think we're going to talk about this. Maybe we already did the price cost range or how mold assessments. So I guess you could speak specifically.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, I didn't mention that. A Tiger mold assessment starts at $425. That includes the full assessment, everything visual, infrared, top to bottom evaluation of the house, all the on-site stuff. It also includes 2 samples. Usually it's my control sample outside and an air sample inside, typically in the basement. It includes shipping to the lab. It includes the lab fees. It includes my compilation of the report, and it includes me on the phone later on down the road if there's questions. So it's really a pretty good deal. The extra samples that I mentioned before, if I do need to take extra samples, they do cost extra. They're 75 each. And I always warn my clients up front that adds up really fast. But sometimes it's necessary. We're just trying to get a really thorough, comprehensive picture of what's going on in the house. The more samples I can take, the better picture I'm going to have. In an ideal world, I take a sample in every single room of the house, but you can imagine that gets rather costly. People don't want to pay that, so I don't do that. I kind of take the minimum number that I can and still get good information throughout the house, so I can produce a good report that tells us what we need to know.
Great, thanks, Bill. We have about 5 or 6 more minutes, so we should move on to the last section.
Okay, that is, what is the realtor's responsibility in a real estate transaction? Well, basically knowledge. You want to read up on this stuff, but don't just jump onto the internet, because we know what's going to happen there. There are some accredited labs that do analyzing on mold and asbestos and other stuff too. Their websites are pretty good. You can go on our website. We have some good information there. But basically, you want to hire a consultant, which is a certified mold specialist. And you also want to convey to the clients that mold can be corrected. Please. I keep hearing these people talk about, oh, I don't want to buy a mold home, or, oh no, the house has mold. That's it for the house. We just need to burn it down. No. Mold can always be corrected. This is something I tell people constantly. So if you can convey that to your clients, you do them a great service. Know when to recommend a professional, when to recommend an assessment, and when to recommend remediation. We went through a little of that today. Have a list of trusted professionals, so you have some good references you can hand off to them, and understand remediation methods. You can go to the EPA or the Connecticut DPH websites and read up on what's involved here with the remediation. We went through a little bit of it, the basics, but you can get a little more involved in that, and that's good information. Again, remediation looks very, very scary when you watch it, because these guys are running around in moon suits and they've got these big fans running and all kinds of crazy things. But really, it's pretty basic when it comes down to it. It's pretty simple stuff. So for buyers or homeowners, if they're going to do it themselves, you want to urge them to go to the EPA website or Connecticut and read up on how to do this. Both websites have really good resources for homeowners on how to do this effectively and safely. And also, you want to stress to them that, fine, clean up the mold, but you're going to have to address the moisture also, because the mold's just coming back. No options for mold assessment and sampling. It's not a bad idea if a house is being listed and there's a known mold issue in there. We'll get an assessment done, find out how extensive it is, find out why that mold is there, where's the moisture coming from. And then again, understand the difference between homeowner and professional remediation. And of course, use Tiger as a resource. Connecticut statutes do not mandate that a prospective seller fill out a mold and mold forming condition disclosure. I'm sure you all know that. It's a voluntary form. It's there. It's available. I would recommend that it be used, again, because so many people have a lot of misunderstandings about mold. And there's a lot of people out there that are really scared of mold. They shouldn't be. Nobody should be scared of mold. It can always be corrected. But this will help to allay some of those fears. Managing mold, again, mold remediation is not a licensed industry. Be careful. Make sure you hire certified, experienced professionals and get objective third-party opinions. You really don't want the mold remediator coming out and doing testing to find out if there's mold in the house. He's got a vested interest in finding mold. You don't want a remediator coming out and doing post-remediation assessments either. This is testing after the remediation has been done to make sure that they did their job correctly. He's got a vested interest at that point in finding no mold because he just remediated the house. So the assessor and the remediator really need to be kept completely separate. They should be separate companies. We have some resources here. The Connecticut Department of Public Health, they publish a brochure, a little pamphlet, Mold Guidance for the Real Estate, Banking, and Insurance Communities. If you haven't run into that, go and find it. It's wonderful. I'm not a big fan of government publications, but this one is really good. It's very, very well written. And I can say the same for the EPA. They have their own brochure, a brief guide to mold, moisture, and your home. Very, very well written, just common sense, no nonsense, simple information and instruction for homeowners on what to do when you've got a mold issue. Really good stuff. And I think Yes, we're done. Unless you have more questions.
I don't have any more questions. Thank you, Bill. If anybody has any more questions, feel free to chat those in. You have our contact information here. As Bill said, we're always a resource for you. All of our email addresses are there. And obviously our 800 number is the main office, our website. Please do check out our YouTube channel. We have programs like this and other special programs on Radon. We have new agent programs, and follow us on Instagram. You can find out about our 30 anniversary special. We're doing $30 off inspections and $30 off Radon right now. But those are ever changing. And of course, you can follow that on social media. But most importantly, our raffle winner today is Amber Jones. So congratulations, Amber. And I've got a couple comments here. I'm not sure what that is. So Amber was sending a note to Martha. So I'll let you guys manage that. I hope everything's okay over there, Martha. And congratulations, Amber. And hopefully we'll see you all again soon.
And Kara, I
Thanks
just
for
want to
attending.
follow up. There was people were asking about if you're going to get a copy of the recording, and yes, we will be sending up a follow-up email, and it will also include those links. So please look for that and the recording.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Kara.